Welcome, everyone. Does it sound right? Sorry. Yeah. Hello, everybody. A warm welcome to you all. For those who are coming in, we just wanted to let you know that we have interpretation available. This webinar will be starting soon, and it's going to be in Portuguese, English, and French. So we will have interpretation for each of these languages. If you want to access this service, please go to your Zoom menu and select the icon with the globe and look for language interpretation, and then pick the language, pick English as your language. Bonjour tout le monde, je vous souhaite la bienvenue. L'événement va commencer bientôt. Et veuillez noter que le webinaire va se dérouler en français, en anglais et portugais. Donc, on va avoir des services d'interprétation dans les trois langues. Donc, pour configurer le service, veuillez vous rendre dans le menu Zoom. Et si vous êtes sur un ordinateur, il faut sélectionner l'icône du globe qui est localisée un peu à la droite au centre indépendant de votre écran. Et si vous êtes plutôt sur une tablette ou un smartphone, sélectionnez l'icône plus ou bien les trois points. Et sélectionnez ensuite Language Interpretation et Français dans le menu qui s'affiche. For those of you who are connecting with a smartphone or a tablet, please select the icon plus or the three dots, and then look for language interpretation, and then click on English in the menu that will appear.
Bom dia a todos, a todas e a todes, bem-vindos. Nós temos interpretação disponível para o português. Se vocês estiverem num computador, por favor, clicar no ícone que simboliza um globo terrestre e selecionar a nossa língua, português. E para quem estiver num smartphone, pode ir no ícone, que tem 3 pontinhos, e selecionar esses 3 pontinhos e vai aparecer a indicação para a interpretação. Obrigada.
Again, welcome you all. It is a great pleasure to have you here in this webinar to discuss the need to protect livelihoods during dam closures. And on behalf of WIEGO, welcome to this webinar. Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing is a global network focused on empowering the working poor, especially women in the informal economy, to secure their livelihoods. And as we get ready to start, I just wanted to share with you some house rules. We have prepared for you a webinar that is divided in 3 parts. During the first part, we will have the presentation of 3 cases of geographies where WIEGO is working. And then we will have 2 wonderful discussants to share their insights and reflections based on their experiences and work in South Africa and Paraguay. Following that, we will have a Q&A and open the floor for you. For in terms of timings, we have allotted to each of the presenters of the 3 cases 10 minutes. And then we have the 2 discussants, and we ask the discussants to take 5 minutes each. Welcome you all. And before we start, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce you first to Dr. Sonia Diaz, who is WIEGO's Global Waste Specialist, and her work spans nearly 4 decades in global and local geographies, including action research, policy, and advocacy. Dr. Diaz will introduce us with will set the ground for the discussion today, and then immediately after, she will, in tandem with Lúcia F. Nascimento, who is a waste speaker and the leader of CORACE cooperative, which is affiliated to CENTCOOP, an MNCR second-level cooperative, and who is a former dump picker from the Estrutural dump in Brasília. Well, they will start to present the case of Brasília immediately after Dr. Diaz sets us and introduces us to today's discussions. Thank you very much. The mic is yours, Dr. Diaz.
Thank you so much, Olga, and I'm very pleased to have all you guys here so that we can discuss a bit of this very important issue. I just want to set the stage very quickly. I think it's very important for us to be aware that the issue of final disposal of waste has been of great concern for decades. And this is due to the environmental impact of inadequate disposal of wastes, but also due to the human rights dimension that comes with it. On one side, we have, the deplorable conditions workers, formal and informal, are exposed to in open dump sites. And open dump sites here, very briefly, referring to those waste sinks that are not engineered landfills. On the other side, we have the environmental concerns around inadequate disposal of waste and its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, GHG. Just to stay on one aspect of the environmental implications of open dump sites. And there is reason to be concerned. The waste sector contribution to GHG emission is estimated around 5% of global anthropogenic emissions, primarily from open dumping and disposal in landfills. However, if open burning of waste is taken into account, solid waste contribution to climate change is even more significant. Black carbon emissions for open burning of waste are estimated to be equivalent to 2 to 10% of global CO2 emissions, which is 2 to 8 times larger than methane emissions from dump sites. However, there is reason to be concerned also about the human cost of open dumps, and WIEGO has been documenting these systematically, particularly around the human rights dimensions in dump sites in Central America, and the evidence is shocking. But there is also something we need to take into consideration when talking about final disposal of waste, which is the environmental role of waste pickers. In the last 10 to 15 years, there were multiple evidences pointing out to the importance of the role waste pickers play in reclaiming recyclables, which would be otherwise dumped into the environment. I study from the Global Review of Safe and of Engineered Life, for instance, estimates that waste pickers collect 58% of plastics. WIEGO's GHG calculator, for instance, has provided us with evidence on how waste pickers in different geographies that we are working with WIEGO team are contributing to GHG mitigation. And with the growing concerns around climate change, there is a trend towards pressure to end burning and open burning, open dumping and open burning. And these processes are happening hastily, often with livelihoods being a neglected aspect. If we take a close look at the past very briefly, and when we saw the beginning of solid waste management in the turn from the 19th to the 20th century in European and American cities, we can see that waste became inextricably connected to public health and to class struggles. And when the first municipal solid waste management systems were created, a crackdown on those whose source of livelihoods was waste ensued. The options for formalization of the urban poor happened to a very few back then. So there are reasons for us to be concerned by top-down formalization processes in solid waste management. And if we look at the present day, this may be what is not maybe, it is what is happening in the world. So there are a few questions we want and we need to grapple with, not only in this webinar, but it's something that we should be all delving into. How will climate change and broader environmental concerns be linked to livelihoods in the closure of dump sites? What is happening on the ground in the geographies of where WIEGO is working? It's one of the things that we are very concerned about. And this webinar today, we hope to delve into what is happening in three geographies: Brasília in Brazil, and Accra, and in Dakar. So I will move on to my presentation for Brasília. If I can, yeah, it's here. Okay, so let me give you just some background into the dump Estrutural in Brasília. This dump was located near a national park at the base of an important river that supplies the water to Brasília, which is the capital city of Brazil. And Estrutural dump was the second largest open dump in the world, according to ISVA's Waste Atlas. And it had been in operation since the 1960s, particularly receiving household waste and commercial and debris, and pruning and bulky waste. Over the years, a village over 40,000 inhabitants emerged on the outskirts of this open dump. It was also a housing settlement for many dump waste pickers, and it also included scrap shops and a very diversified economy. The next slide, please. So through this, the next slide, please. Thank you. At this timeline, you can see very briefly how the process of closing this dump happened. For decades, the judiciary system in Brazil ordered the government of Brasília to close the dump. Each new government would announce the closure, but never fully commit to the process. And by 2015, pressured by the prosecutor for the environment, which issued a fine to the government, the new governor decided to take up the challenge of closing this open dump, but with the commitment to integrate the waste pickers. And the first thing he did was to conduct a preliminary diagnosis about the situation of the dump site, and it identified 27 key problems, and 17 government agencies were listed as having some role to play in carry out the task of close the dump site with integration of waste pickers. So an emergency plan was drafted to cope with the most pressing issues, and the government also engaged the researchers from the University of Brasília to carry out an epidemiological study to better assess the situation of the dump pickers and of the neighboring community, and to establish a baseline as well as a plan on how the government would address the issue, occupational issues, educational and economic issues connected to integrating the dump pickers. So by 2015, a decree was issued and the government created an intersecretariat working group with those 17 government agencies that were listed in the diagnosis, and they have this working group had the following objectives: to improve the dump management towards a controlled dump, to design the new waste sink as a sanitary landfill, so another area where a sanitary landfill was to be built, and to elaborate a plan to help the dump pickers to migrate to adequate facilities and to form organizations that could enable the government to hire them as service providers. And so this work began. The government also invited organizations like WIEGO, ISVA, and some institutions in Brazil, reputed institutions of sanitation in Brazil, to form a monitoring committee to oversee the process to ensure that environmental but also social measures were addressed. And in 2017, the government inaugurated its sanitary landfill and was going to shut down the Estrutural. But under our request, WIEGO request, and the Estrutural and the monitoring committee, the government decided to wait another year to allow even more time for the workers to adapt to new measures and to have the cooperatives working in their own spaces. So in 2018, January 2018, the Structural dump was finally closed. Workers were working from cooperatives, those that opted to join cooperatives, and waste began to be disposed of at the new sanitary landfill. Next slide, please. Very quickly, I can show you the participatory platforms that were in place to ensure integration of waste pickers. There was an existing waste and citizenship forum which had more organized workers, those from cooperatives. So the government created the CISC committee for inclusion of waste pickers, which also included non-organized autonomous workers. And with the transition working group created within the government, these were the three platforms where workers could influence the policy making around closure of the dump. The next slide, please. While the process was not free of conflict, as I showed you, there were many participatory platforms, and the government during the first 2 years carried out more than 300 meetings with the workers and signed a commitment letter in which the government made sure that it would address the issue of integrating waste pickers with their integration service providers in the segregation at source, and building and or renting spaces for the work, and ensure compensation for loss of their working space at the dump site, and many other commitments. The next slide, please. So some of the main features, there were full commitment from the government, participatory channels were created, dump pickers organize themselves, and their active involvement in the process was absolutely crucial. The government ensured that the dump pickers would be integrated through the selective collection. Some of the challenges that I'll touch base very quickly. The problem with closing dumps, and it's usually that workers, when they move on to segregation at source, they tend to receive less. But Lúcia will speak a bit more about that, about the benefits and also the challenges. And there is always the problem about how waste, in terms of the value chain, how waste pickers in general receive, the list in the value chain, something that a few things are beyond the scope of government, local governments, immediate concern of local governments. Next slide, please. So the takeaways: it's important to have compensation for workers, but this does not address livelihood, unless the government has a clear roadmap. And livelihoods restoration plans, although it's like a mantra that many finance organizations who are involved in these large infrastructure processes of closing dumps, they use this as a kind of panacea to say that they are catering for social inclusion. But unless you have a very clear and meaningful roadmap, to include workers in many process like social protection, health, and also to ensure that the livelihood restoration plan is effectively implemented. And what the government did was the creation of this monitoring committee that WIEGO and other organizations participated, and we have been, overseeing. We oversaw the process of closure, and we are still overseeing what is happening on the ground. So I'll leave it at that, because I wanted to leave space and time for Lúcia, who will share a bit of her perspective. Lúcia, querida, pode fazer sua fala. Obrigada.
Lúcia, dear, you can speak now. Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me? We can. You can start now. Okay, so my name is Lúcia. I'm 42 years, and I worked for 20 years at the dump. And what changed? What changed when the dump was closed? As Sonia explained, it was a very difficult situation for us back then, because even though we didn't have dignity, we did make enough money for our livelihood. So that was a huge impact for us when the dump was closed. And the benefits for us were also very important. We had several meetings, we went to conferences, and there was a group created involving several secretariats, where we as waste speakers had a seat at the table, at those tables. And I would say then that we as waste speakers had a say in the closing of that dam. That was the biggest one in Latin America. Of course, that closing was very complicated. From 2017 to 2018, on the 20th of January, the dam was closed, and we will never forget that date. It will really stay in our memory. And when the dam was closed, the cooperatives were no longer in it. Some cooperatives went to other sites, and some others went to warehouses that were rented. And the government supported us with that rent. We stayed at that warehouse for 9 months, and then we went to the final site, and it was the very own government that built that warehouse. And we were 3 cooperatives working there. the most difficult thing was that we were not used to work in an organized way. We used to work separately. We didn't have that organization among the three cooperatives. But after leaving the dump, we were forced to work dividing everything in equal parts. We needed to coordinate our actions. And also we needed to share the same space with other two cooperatives. So we were three different cooperatives sharing the same warehouse. And I remember that the first time that we had to pay rent, it was 73 reals. We will never forget that. And when many of the waste speakers saw the value for the income, we realized that the income at the time when we started was not very good, but at least we realized that the situation was not great at the beginning because we didn't have security, we didn't have a livelihood, so being coordinated was very good for us. We do have some waste speakers that were able to obtain some benefits because they had some diseases or because they were elder. And I would say also that there are many courses. After the dam was closed, we were trained. We were given some benefits for waste speakers to be able to supplement their income because at the beginning the income was quite low. So we participated from several courses in order to train ourselves as a cooperative, to know how to organize ourselves. And the biggest impact was with contracts, because those cooperatives, after leaving the dam, were given a contract, different type of contracts for selective picking. So as I said, there were three different cooperatives working together, and two of those cooperatives had a specific contract with an organization for triage. And today, all the materials and all the tons that we sell, and actually we have received 5 years ago 300 reals per ton, and now we are receiving 400. So I would say that the values are improving. And of course, today we are receiving our payments by tons, and the income that we receive is divided among all of the waste speakers that are part of the cooperative. And today, we see that there are waste speakers that are not even receiving the minimum wage. But if we consider the benefits that we are given by the government, we are at the level of the minimum wage, and that at least is enough for us to survive. And working in organized places and working in a safe place as well, and having several programs like Health for Women and courses that are offered to us. And also many of us are going back to school. And that was very important for us because we were given those opportunities as well.
Yeah, dear Lúcia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lúcia. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Diaz and Lúcia for these accounts. We're now going to our other two presenters, and I will introduce them very briefly before they go so that they can just go after one another. So first we have Dr. Owusu Wampang, who is a senior research fellow and the head of the Department of Integrated Development Studies at the University of Cape Coast, and who's been working very closely with the Kpone waste speakers in Accra. And we have as well Majed Diop, who's been working with WIEGO as part of our Focal Cities initiative under the Reducing Waste in Coastal Cities project in Dakar, Senegal since 2018. He's an organizer and activist. Thank you very much. Dr. Owusu Wampang, would you mind starting?
Yes, thank you very much, Olga. And I'm excited to be part of this process. As you said, I've been working with the pond waste pickers a couple of years now. So what I'm sharing with you are basically to give you some accounts or brief accounts of events that led to the closure of pond landfill site way back in June 2020 without any livelihood safeguards. And in that process, WIEGO also supported the pond waste pickers to kind of reimagine alternative livelihoods outside the pond landfill site. So a bit of a background of the landfill site. Can you move to the next slide? The pond landfill, engineered landfill site actually was opened in 2013 to serve Tema Metropolitan Assembly. It was actually funded by the World Bank. We also began working with the workers at the site consistently since 2016. The landfill site was designed initially to receive about 500 tons, but it ended up receiving about 1,000 tons a year. The reason is that the site was serving not only the Metropolitan Assembly, but also the Greater Accra Metropolitan Assembly. So it was a matter of time that it was going to be closed. So way back again in August 2016, there was a fire outbreak where about 30 waste pickers were working. Now we understand the waste pickers, the numbers have increased to about 700. So they were relocated to a nearby site. And then in June 2020, in the midst of the COVID, the landfill site was decommissioned. So in fact, we got to hear about the closure way back March 2018 through media reports. The waste pickers were never officially informed about the closure. And of course, again, in April 2018, the World Bank released what we call the Resettlement Policy Framework, which set out the objectives of what we call the GARET project. That is the Greater Accra Resilient Integrated Project, basically to help improve flooding situation in Greater Accra and also effectively help manage solid waste management in Accra. And in that report, it specifically organized the fact that the project could disrupt, or there could be significant disruptions of livelihood of waste pickers. So WIEGO and the waste pickers were concerned about this. So we undertook a number of actions or advocacy efforts to actually understand what was in the reports, and also to see how best we can also get a livelihood safeguard for the waste pickers. Please, next slide. So from our experience with the GARET project, we had contacts with the World Bank consultants, local consultants. So somewhere October 2019, in fact, we met the World Bank consultant in charge of the GARET project, together with advocates for community alternatives, which are an NGO, and then the waste pickers at the Ministry of Works and Housing, to actually understand what this whole commissioning process was about. And to our surprise, we were told that the pond decommissioning was not on the table. i.e., it was not being funded by the World Bank, and that it was being funded by the government of Ghana. So if there's anything that we want to know, then we have to go to the Ministry of Sanitation, Water Resources. And we were shocked because we felt that this was basically an attempt to explain away lack of consultation and safeguard for waste pickers, and also for them to evade accountability and responsibility in the project. So some of the actions that WIEGO and waste pickers we took, for instance, on 23rd September 2020, we made the World Bank safeguard policy units to insist that the closure of pond landfill site was going to have implications on the livelihoods of the waste pickers. Yet the bank denied involvement in that. They said initially during the conceptualization of the project, one was considered, but subsequently through a number of technical reviews, one was no longer part of the decommission, was no longer part of the GARET project. A number of letters were written to the World Bank, to the Ministries of Sanitation and Water Resources, to raise concerns about the closure and the livelihood implications of that project. So on June 16, for instance, where we wrote a letter to the Ministry of Sanitation and Water Resources, we received no reply. 2nd September 2020, again, the guide coordinator in Accra was written to, and he also claimed the closure was outside again of the scope of the expansion of the pond landfill, which was earlier on considered. So requests for updates on guide project documents were never granted. And sometimes when we asked them, sort of, we need official authorization to be able to disclose anything further in that document. So as we speak today, we don't know which document actually covers the landfill, the decommission of the pond landfill site. Please, next slide.
Dr. Usu, you have 3 minutes left. Sorry.
Okay, so yes, I'm almost done. I'll be there soon. So the pictures you see basically are the two pictures. The one on the left is the decommissioned landfill site, which is covered by AstroTurf, and on the right is the dump site nearby where the waste pickers are currently occupying. Please, next slide. So as we know, the pond landfill waste pickers, in terms of organization, is one of the most organized waste picker association in Accra. But what has happened now, they've called a number of democratic elections. Now there's a new leadership in place. But also what they'll be able to do is help them to form cooperative with the hope that they'll be able to get service contracts to do doorstep collection. That has not happened because the franchise regime actually does not recognize the role of the informal actors in Ghana. So for us, the critical question is how do we translate these organizational assets of pond waste pickers into more of economic benefits, economic and social benefits to the waste pickers. Next slide. Yes, so we see the picture again, the constitution of pond landfill waste pickers. On the right is the picture we took recently, where the visit from Arrow Ellie and the Arrow executives who was there Accra not too long ago to share their experiences with the pond waste pickers with regard to doorstep collection and the national movement building. Next slide. Yes, so what has happened is that, yes, sooner or later, even where the pond waste pickers are working now, they'll be displaced because that's what we hear that very soon it might be closed. But in the midst of the COVID and in the midst of decommissioning, WIEGO supported the pond landfill waste pickers to scope for alternative livelihoods in pond coastal community, which they've done. Now they have in place a proposal that they have developed for doorstep collection. And luckily, they were able to source, in fact, the first grant that they were able to source for grants from an NGO or foundation, which has given them $50,000 to kickstart the doorstep collection process. Next slide.
So could we, sorry,
yes.
Sorry.
Yes, so purely here, this is the cooperative. They received their certificate of operations. As I said, they are very sooner or later, they will kickstart their operations. Even though they don't have contracts from the municipal authority, but we've learned some lessons from Arrow that we don't have to wait for doorstep collection contract as long as they can get community legitimacy for doorstep contracts. So that is where we are. We've moved from a stage where the landfill was decommissioned without consultation with the waste pickers. It was decommissioned without restoration plan. But through the support of WIEGO, they've been able to develop proposals for doorstep collection to the extent that they have been able to receive some grants to kickstart the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Usu. Megat, are you ready?
Oui. Merci.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Olga. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to share with our colleagues and other organizations on this issue that is a global issue. This issue has also various forms and has led to many difficulties for the workers themselves. To give you a quick idea about the title that we gave here, support the waste pickers organization in their strategies to integrate new modern models of waste management systems. So this is what we've been doing in Dakar, really. So as a reminder, the project of the dump closure started in 2018, and that was also at the same time of the reduction of waste in coastal cities in Senegal. So that gave us some time to organize trainings and support systems, organizational system, and that allowed waste pickers to reach a certain level of leadership. And that was very important for the rest of the activities. Next slide, please. So I'll try to share with you a quick summary of this issue in 4 steps. So first, the history of the Mbeubeuss dump, then the project in itself that has a negative impact on the waste pickers, then the research for alternative livelihoods that we considered as a response with various response elements to help waste pickers continue their work despite the very negative situation for them. And then the 4th step will be on demands and waste pickers initiatives, because they have managed to develop many strategies that help them in their work and help them get the authorities to listen to them. Next slide, please. So why Mbeubeuss? Well, it's a landfill that existed in another place, but that was moved to a new site in 1972. So Mbeubeuss is the name of a lake that is still there, but so now the landfill has the name of that lake. So that was in 72. Then in 1980, sorry, there's a really bad agricultural crisis in Dakar. And so many people moved to Dakar and migrated to the city. And they found a job as waste pickers. And then in 1994, Bank Diem was born as a waste picker organization, because at that time, there was a lot of stigma around waste pickers. And so they needed to organize themselves to face that stigma, to have discussion spaces with the state and with the partners. Next slide, please. So it's in 2018, as I was saying earlier, that the Promojet project was born. So it's a credit line that allows for the creation of infrastructure and services of solid waste management. And so this is the idea was to close the landfill in 2026 through this project. And then there's an agency that is to be created, the SOMAGED. It's an agency that is going to work for a quick privatization of waste management. And the process is already ongoing with conventions that are being signed at the moment with private societies and companies. And so waste pickers need to so that they can continue existing in the system, they need to organize themselves better. And this is where we stand at the moment with them. Next slide, please.
Donc, comme je le disais, notre travail, c'est un
As
peu
I was saying, we are there to support them, to provide trainings, to find other ways of working. And as my colleague was saying, we are trying to see how we can externalize some skills of workers. So we are working with some cities and towns, and these experiences, these activities are going on, and we will be working also with the Environment Ministry to see how can waste pickers can keep doing the work that they were doing in the landfills, but in the cities and in the towns. So here you can see on the pictures what we were doing with local communities when waste pickers went there to raise awareness, to discuss about the project. Next slide, please. And here, as you can see, we are trying to provide them other skills so that they can have other means to have livelihoods. Here you see workers transforming local cereals, and they also have a specific team working on that. And with the organization Synthèse, we managed to train 5 women in the soap sector, and on the other pictures you can see other activities and trainings. For instance, they were having trainings in some towns, in a town, Thierry-sur-Mer. It's a very highly polluted area because of the plants that are there, and the waste pickers are really working there, or raising awareness with these local communities to try to overcome this challenge. And this can also create an alternative to have new livelihoods. Next slide, please. Here, it is the current situation. So the waste pickers are doing many communication activities. They're really trying to raise awareness so that the government can recognize and acknowledge what they are doing and their work. So they created a cooperative with the help of BD, and it was supported by WIEGO in Dakar, and they are also trying to create a trade union with the help of Synthèse so that they can organize themselves, And it's really important because with the support of the Synthèse, they managed to be recognized in a better way by the government. And even the President of the Republic said that with the closing of this landfill, the waste pickers will have to be integrated in this process and that they should be helped. And as I said, there's also Sonaged SA. So this is a company that was created by the state and that will work on the privatization of the whole waste management process, and the waste pickers are also urging to be integrated in the discussions by SONAGED, for instance, by receiving contracts from this company. And right now, that is what they are doing. So here you can see a few pictures showing showing that the waste pickers managed to sign an agreement and receive some funds from, yes, the government. They also receive some material and equipment. And here you see a gathering of waste pickers. Next slide, please.
Ici, c'est plus de clarification pour l'espace de questions et réponses. On a déjà dépassé le temps.
We will have then a Q&A session. Unfortunately, we don't have time. I am really sorry. I tried to sum up, but it's hard to do it. So in a nutshell, we are really trying to work to raise awareness, but also to take advantage of international standards, for instance, the Treaty on Plastic. I'm sorry, thank you very much. I know that I don't have that much time, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Thank you, Maguette.
Thank you very much for these really good presentations showing different types of handling the closure of dump sites. We now are going to pass to our discussants. We have Dr. Jennifer L. Tucker, who's a scholar on development, urban equality, and struggles for social justice. She's an associate professor of community and regional planning at the University of New Mexico, and her Fulbright research investigates attempts to upgrade waste systems in Asunción, Paraguay, while supporting informal workers and grassroots recyclers. And we also have Dr. Melanie Sampson, who's an associate professor in sociology at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Among other things, she's facilitated the multi-party participatory process to develop the South African government's waste picker integration guideline for South Africa. And she appears as a main author of the guideline, as well as she has led the stakeholder participation in the development of the South African waste picker registration system. Dr. Tucker, Dr. Sampson, based on your experiences in South Africa and in Paraguay, we wanted to ask you, to provide us some of your insights and thoughts with regards to how to address livelihoods and environmental goals when upgrading safe disposal of waste. And if you could actually delve in terms of what is the role of institutions such as international development banks, what is the role of the state, and what type of strategies should worker movements adopt towards enforcing these livelihood safeguards. We will start with Dr. Tucker, please. And sorry, the time is kind of limited, so we have 5 minutes each. I thank you very much.
Great, it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for that introduction. Before I dive into my research that looks at protecting livelihoods while upgrading urban waste systems, which is the fruit of work that I've been conducting research and work in Paraguay since 2005. I just wanted to reflect, based on these conversations and presentations, that we really know a lot about what works in protecting livelihoods during transitions like dump closures. It's just really hard to make it real in practice. We know that we need meaningful participation of workers through institutionalized spaces like we saw in Brasília. We need implementation plans that center livelihood, that compensate workers. And this requires the active support of state and civil society actors, and there's a really important role for advocacy and research in these processes. And that we also need, it's really helpful to have propitious political environments, like we saw in the case of Brasília. And what I want to focus on is a little different than the questions, but I also want to note and underscore that all presenters share an ethical and epistemological starting point, which acknowledges that it's reclaimers who built the value chain across most of the global South and have faced significant harms to their body and health to do so. And so for me, this prompts a question of what do we owe reclaimers? And I would suggest we owe a lot. And I'll just put in the chat an article that I co-authored recently that suggests that we use the framework of reparations rather than formalization when we're thinking about how to include and integrate waste pickers into these systems. So I've been engaging in some Fulbright funded research to ask how to protect livelihoods as Asunción, Paraguay moves to upgrade its urban infrastructure. And our project has found that there is a series of barriers to pro-port integration of the waste system. We're looking at Cateura, which is a sanitary landfill, a semi-regulated sanitary landfill in Asunción. The process is still ongoing, but thus far there have been major transformations to the waste system without meaningful participation, which risks dispossessing dump site workers who in Paraguay are called gancheros. And I want to stress that the roots of these barriers we found is a set of discursive and epistemological assumptions of policymakers. So in this case, it's sort of turning the gaze towards policymakers and their assumptions and practices. And I'm just going to focus on one because of the time, which is what I think of as an anti-poor epistemology, which is deep biases that devalue the lives, labor, and spaces of poor people generally and waste pickers specifically. In a major development project called Green Asunción that was upgrading, seeking to green the city's a series of urban systems, we found that both the UNDP and city officials identified waste picker organizing cultures as a barrier to reform. And so I'll just provide a little bit of background here. Gancheros in Asunción are highly organized. They've successfully defended access to Cateura for decades. They provide livelihood for thousands. They did this by negotiating provisional deals with municipal officials, which is an indication of a particular kind of state practice, deal making. And they also worked with the dump site operator. And in this closure process, which is ongoing, they were able to secure a promise from the municipality to build a transfer station at the dump. And this is big because it may keep work in poor neighborhoods. And this is part of a historic struggle against the forces of gentrification and speculative urbanism that want to take over the dump site, but then also these poor neighborhoods for other sorts of development. But instead of seeing capacities to make life work under very difficult conditions, officials saw something else. One official worried that gancheros would, quote, throw their bodies in front of the train of progress rather than, quote, modernize. And they're very critical of ganchero organizing styles, accusing leaders of, quote, enslaving their members. And there may be some truth to this assessment. Organizational styles are hierarchical and they're reportedly punitive, with imbalances between and inside 3 different workers' associations. Yet policymakers frame these organizing styles as individual or cultural deficits rather than as historical products. They overlook the relational nature of these organizing processes in which constituents develop strategies aimed to respond to the local dynamics of power and decision-making. In Paraguay, clientelism delivers state benefits based on promises of party loyalty and votes, like promises that trash will continue to arrive to Cateura even after the dump closes. And it also encourages patriarchal leaders who are skilled at engaging in the rough and tumble of party politics. And they also really overlooked that successful cases of integrating informal workers. I just have
aussi les travailleurs.
Oh, here's the translation. Successful cases of informal worker integration requires significant investment of external supporters, churches, NGOs, and state officials and researchers. These external supporters need to trust in the capacity of informal workers to transform the conditions of their work and life, alongside the recognition that histories of marginalization require proactive investments and capacity building. Yet the UND proposed budget allocates less than 1% to waste picker integration. The anti-poor epistemology can also be linked to other problems and barriers, including overlooking the diversity of waste picker work processes. It leads to plans that only supports cooperatives, which can lead to excluding unorganized and autonomous workers. And it can privatize waste rather than protecting waste picker access to trash as a livelihood resource. So just in conclusion, I just want to say that pro-forward transformations to waste systems often require confronting political and economic elites who have a vested interest in the status quo. There's a whole nother set I'd love to talk about in the Q&A if there's time, which is how public-private alliances in the waste sector use what we could think of as informal processes to create protected spheres of profit-making, protected from competition as favored businesses gain a monopoly. But I'll just close by saying that these anti-poor epistemologies undergird the status quo and present serious barriers to pro-poor reform.
Dr. Sampson, the mic is yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Melanie.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak on this at this panel. And I just want to quickly show the camera. So what we've done in Johannesburg, I hope you can see as I'm moving around the room. Prior to the start of this webinar, we've been having a workshop with landfill reclaimers from landfills in and around Johannesburg to look at what their demands, what their concerns, and then to, because we knew that this, sorry, I'm moving around. We knew that this webinar would be addressing a lot of the issues that they are confronting here. So thank you so much to the presenters for sharing those very rich experiences. And just to speak for a minute about those experiences, I think taken together, what the three presentations really show is the centrality of having actual integration policies and platforms and agreements. And I think we can see in Brazil, because that was already in place, because of the decades of organizing by reclaimers and pendadoras, that when it came to of that landfill, there were those relationships and policies and principles in place that enabled the comrades in Brazil to reach those remarkable agreements. And I think it really is quite breathtaking, particularly in terms of the number of meetings that were taking place when we struggle so much to have meetings with government representatives. But at the same time, what we're seeing is in Accra and Ghana, although it's been much more of a struggle because those institutional structures and processes were not in place, we can see how the dump closures have then catalyzed organizing or boosted the organizing by reclaimers. And so it really is this dialectical process. And we have to work with the context that we have. Now, just to jump to the South African experience, I think what we need to note is that reclaimers in South Africa and the work that they do, this really is a continuation of gendered racial capitalism. You know, the concept of racial capitalism emerged in South Africa because of the gross dehumanization and exploitation of Black male mine workers on the reef, which Johannesburg is located on. And it's when we look at the work that reclaimers are doing today, it is very much the same circumstance, and that reclaimers have been completely unpaid. So it's not just that like the mining industry was based on, extremely exploitative wages paid to mine workers in South Africa, and I think in most countries around the world, reclaimers labor, free labor by Black workers has been the foundation of the recycling economy. And so it's within this historical context that reclaimers began to organize and to make the demands and launch their struggles. And when we analyze, the way that waste picker integration was understood before the African Reclaimers Organization began to organize around integration, I argue that integration was based on a number of erasures. The first is the erasure of their work as a productive economic activity. It's seen as some marginal livelihood activity on the margins of the economy. It's also based on the erasure of their knowledge, right? The framing of reclaimers as human waste, whereas we all know, as Jennifer said, that they are the real experts and the only people who know how to extract recyclables from the waste stream in post-colonial contexts. Integration, the way it was understood here, was also an erasure of the systems that they've created. And so integration was really understood as we have these poor waste pickers who are working on their own, as the municipalities and our experts must create programs for them without consulting them in a kind of charity model and bring them into what we think integration should be. Whereas in South Africa, reclaimers have been collecting 80 to 90% of the post-consumer recyclables that enter the recycling value chain. They are the foundation of the economy, of the recycling economy, and they do this through what we call their separation outside source system. And so a lot of the work we've done here is interrogating what happens when government develops these programs and policies that does not acknowledge that there is a system that already exists. And of course, that leads to mass dispossession. And then lastly, but primarily, the approach to integration in South Africa was previously based, as racial capitalism always is, on the erasure of the reclaimers' humanity. And so based on this context, we then embarked on a process in South Africa to develop a waste picker integration guideline. And I'm just going to speak very quickly about some of the policy and institutional achievements that we've had. And then I'll speak a little bit about the challenges of putting them into practice. So what we did in South Africa, I facilitated a 3-year multi-stakeholder process, which brought together reclaimers, industry, government officials. And over a period of 3 years, through a series of workshops, we collectively developed the Waste Picker Integration Guideline for South Africa. Organized reclaimers in South Africa played a key role in those processes. And one of the first things we did was agree on a set of 10 principles that must underpin anything we do related to waste picker integration. And the key one is, and the first one is, respect and recognition of reclaimers' contributions and their expertise. Through this process, we came with a very interesting definition of waste picker integration, which departs from integration as erasure. So our definition, the official definition in South Africa of waste picker integration, is the creation of formally planned recycling systems that recognize, value, and build on the strengths of the existing systems created by reclaimers. That waste picker integration must pay reclaimers for the service that they provide and improve their conditions of work. And also, notably, our definition of waste picker integration says we need political, social, and economic and cultural integration, not just the economic integration. So we developed that guideline. And then a guideline is a guideline, but our national waste management strategy, which was revised in 2020, then said that municipalities, all metros, needed to integrate waste pickers by 2021 and all other municipalities by 2024. So this is now a legal requirement on municipalities. We then, at the same time, were developing extended producer responsibility regulations in South Africa. And because we had done the work on the guideline and then the National Waste Management Strategy, our EPR regulations say that industry must pay reclaimers for the service they provide. So this is directly addressing and redressing the exploitation of reclaimers' free labor. And so we now have all of these fantastic policies in place. However, the struggle is ongoing in order to make these a reality. And I'll just give one quick example. I know I have around a minute left. The producer responsibility organizations in South Africa for the past year have had the responsibility of paying reclaimers, and we have consistently told them, and the movements have consistently made demands that they need to put systems in place to start paying the reclaimers who we have already registered. And while they have been sitting and not fulfilling their obligations, the African Reclaimers Organization has a team that's been going out and doing registration and is now going to a new phase of signing reclaimers up for the systems so that they can be paid. And I think what this shows is that even when we win the institutions and the formal structures, it still takes organizing by reclaimers. And one of the very impressive things for me about Arrow, as I think our colleague from Ghana said, is that Arrow is not waiting for government or industry to implement the policies and the legislation. They have gone out, as I say, to register the reclaimers themselves to ensure that they will be paid. And one of their strategies has been to directly engage residents. And again, the colleague from Ghana mentioned this, but rather than waiting to get a contract for separation at source from the state, they have gone and built relationships with resident associations and developed insurgent recycling systems in different suburbs across Johannesburg now, where they relate directly to residents. And there have been some really wonderful instances where private companies contracted by the city have tried to go into communities to collect their recyclables, and the residents have blocked the trucks from entering because they said, we recycle with reclaimers. So those are some of the strategies that have been used here, but I'm sure the comrades here will agree that particularly the Brazilian experience is a real inspiration for us, and that we learn quite a deal from all of the struggles around the world and the ways in which reclaimers have fought for your rights in the three countries. Thank you.
Samson. We would like to now open the floor for a Q&A. So if you have questions for our panelists, please let me know. Questions?
Hi, we have a question here. Sorry, we can't raise our hands because we're not by the computer. This is Eva McQuena from the Arrow engagement team.
Okay, hi everyone. As Melanie said, I'm Eva McQuena. So my question is to Sonia in Brazil. Sonia, how did you manage to persuade the government to support the reclaimers the way it does even now? So what stages did you go through, and what precaution did you take in order to be recognized and to be included in everything that the government is doing concerning waste management? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva, for your question. First of all, it's not me. It's as Melanie had raised in her presentation. We come from a long history of struggles all over Brazil. And in the case of Brasília, this case that I presented together with Lúcia, the waste speaker that used to work at the dump site, we had the luck of having as president of the cleaning agency of Brasília, the same president of the cleaning agency of my city when I worked in the city. So she brought to Brasilia something that we, in terms of inclusivity, that we had implemented very early on in 1993 in Brazil and my city, Belo Horizonte. So this was something to set the stage. There were there was a team in the government that was really responsive to workers. The other thing is that workers have been organizing themselves for decades. And there were existing platforms in which government and workers were already integrating and having dialogues. So when the closure of the dump was decided by the government really gave a lot of power to the agency, and the agency, together with the workers, engaged very closely. There were many conflicts, okay? And because there was this monitoring committee that we took part of, but other organizations in Brazil as well, we had this very close follow-up of what was going on and concerting and making suggestions to the government, but also to the workers. We were advising workers' leaders, as a monitoring committee. As WIEGO, we were advising both, so that the dialogue was fruitful. So yeah, I guess this is a bit, it's an old struggle, and it comes from, years of policy making and interaction between technical staff who have the luck to be in power and being able to be a bit more responsive. But the workers fought on, even if you have a responsive government, if the workers don't organize themselves, and make clear that what their demands are, nothing's going to work. You cannot sit on. It's what, I echo what Melanie said about Aro. It's exactly what happened. The workers in Brasilia, they were, prompt, to go to the meetings, to demand new things. So it was something that was constructed and built together. I don't know if Lúcia, você quer dizer alguma coisa sobre a...
Lúcia, would you like to say something about how was it for you and how did you do it for the government to hear what you were demanding, or was what I said enough? Would you like to say something about how you organized?
Okay. I think we can move on. She's smiling.
Olá, estão me ouvindo agora?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Ah, tá. Como a Sonia,
Querida, pode
como a
falar.
Sonia,
Yes,
como a
you can
Sonia
go.
falou, né? Não foi muito fácil, não foi flores também, não.
It wasn't easy. It was not all flowers, There were many conflicts with the government for us to get here. So since we were the leaders, many of us went to government meetings. Many of us went to government meetings, and of course, not everything went down the way we wanted things to be. I talked about the tons and the prices for the tons. At the beginning, they were offering us very small numbers, and we were not accepting that. We had several debates. Actually, we went to the house of the governor for one of the meetings. We did a lot to get where we are. And I would say that the model in Brasilia is not the a first world model, but I would say that this is the best that we can have. And actually the contracts that we have right now are very good, because I would say that at the national level, we are receiving the highest numbers. And cooperatives were actually recognized and acknowledged after the dump was closed. And as I said before, you cannot work alone. and you are actually acknowledged as waste pickers and recyclable pickers. And I would say that that acknowledgement started in 2019 after we organized ourselves. We now cover an area of more than 80,000 square meters. And for the last 3 years, I would say that we've been in this warehouse that we are going to spend our entire life. And most of the cooperatives left the dump are now working in a good way. And I know that now what we are doing is becoming a model for other countries. And I know that our reality now is very different from what it used to be, working in the open dump. And I believe that if we now have good income for our workers, that's great then. And I believe that
she lost the connection. Just to wrap it up, there is a crisis in the market, and I popped a clarification. So look at the chat, and you guys are gonna see what is happening in terms of the bigger recycling market and how it is affecting the workers. Olga?
Yeah, there is a question from Antonella Mayelo, and it's directed as you as well, Sonia. And she says, how has the waste pickers movement in Brasília achieved such an important goal to have a contract with municipal governments or perhaps other governments? In Rio de Janeiro, this is something waste pickers have been claiming for decades and have not yet achieved.
Well, I'll pop a link to a publication, so be very short. This is a long history in Brazil that dates back from the late 80s, and it began with the first cooperatives that were created, and later on with the help of a multi-stakeholder platform called the National Waste and Citizenship Forum, which which was backed by UNICEF. The waste pickers achieved greater visibility within the work of this multi-stakeholder forum, and many policies were designed within the umbrella at national and local levels in different cities. Rio de Janeiro is a place that is very complicated because of political culture, the role of traffic, and etc. I'm happy to pop a link here, so where you can have more explanation about how we achieved. It's not perfect, but we achieved some kind of recognition for the waste reclaimers.
Thank you, Charles. Charles Mina, I think you had your hand raised. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Charles Mina. I'm in Kenya. I work with TIAFAN and also work with the waste pickers here. And my observation here in Kenya is that the closure of landfills sometimes, even when it is not abrupt, is also very systematic, in the sense that the municipality or the environmental authority will seek to on a path to starve dump sites of waste. So, and my question is to Prof. Melanie, and from the work with Arrow, just is there, because I think it's not just a problem in Ghana, it's not just in Johannesburg, but it's also the case here in Nairobi. Is there something, I'm just thinking, looking forward, is there a possibility for a regional approach to some of these closures that we are seeing, and also increased privatization of the, of the waste management sector.
Sonia, before you respond, can we take another question? There was a worker that wanted to ask a question. Melanie? Dr. Sampson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can. And I apologize. Sorry if I interrupted you. I apologize. This might be our, depending on the question, this might be our last question. Or if there's another one question, we can take another one after this one, just to be able to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Manta Khwadi. I'm a chairperson of African Reclaimers Organization. It's not a question, it's just a comment. The importance of being organized as workers, as reclaimers, because we can be heard, like people can recognize us as workers, not like they're calling us names. So what I have heard about Brazil has encouraged me a lot, because here in South Africa is what we are on it. So I think my spirit has been lifted more, seeing what the achievement that Brazilian workers have reached. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for these comments. Sonia, would you like to respond to the previous question?
I'm afraid I kind of didn't quite catch it, because my connection is a bit weak. I thought it was directed to Melanie. If you can repeat it to me, if that was directed to me, because yeah. Olga, can you hear
Sorry.
me?
I'm also having some troubles with my audio. Sorry, Charles, would you mind repeating your question? I apologize for this.
I understood it was for Melanie, not for me.
Yeah, it's basically, it can be for you, Sonia, as well. But my question regarding dam closures is also the observation of very concerted efforts to starve dam sites of waste, and in a way increased separation at source, which then means waste pickers who do not have the resources or the equipment to be able to do that work at source then are replaced by private companies. And the reason I was talking, about a regional approach is that it's not just a problem in Ghana or in Kenya. Here is the same problem being faced in Johannesburg. So is there, and I was just imagining in terms of what can we do regionally to address this. And I know comrades at Arrow are doing a great job, but is there something that can be done collectively?
I got it. Thank you, Charles. Well, in case of Brazil, when we are implementing policies of segregation at source as an inclusive recycling system, it is part of the responsibility of the government to provide, within a contract, suppose to provide trucks or the means for collection and other materials and resources that workers may need to carry out the work. But I get what you mean, and I think this is a key issue, because when you are implementing it not as a part of a municipal recycling segregation at source collection, this can be a burden
for workers. And also, even if it is within a contract with the government, but the contract is not well done in a way that the value of the contract paid for the cooperative is able to cover all the costs of the workers doing the service, so it's problematic. So it's a point well taken. Workers in cooperatives here in Brazil have been fighting to win better contracts. And for that, they rely on the support of technical staff who are able to support them in terms of laying down what it takes to implement segregation at source. What are the real costs so that they can fight for better contracts when they have cities who are engaging with them to pay them for the service of collection and sorting. This is it from me.
I think we are at time. I don't know if we have 2 extra minutes just to wrap up. Just wanted to, my apologies here. Something happened on my screen. But we wanted to thank you for your presence, for your participation. I think we had a very rich discussion that took us to the roots of what is really important, which is to have waste pickers at the center. You know, they were the ones that started waste management systems, and they should be recognized as such. And in the process of dump site closures, we've heard the importance of having, you know, and having the participation, active participation of waste pickers in all stages of the process, in the design and the implementation and the monitoring, and also in the follow-up. And we've heard the importance of having mechanisms to ensure that this happens. And in doing that, we have heard some of the strategies from waste pickers, be it in terms of putting in place their own initiatives to demonstrate that they can do this without having to wait. We have seen strategies to ally with others, and especially the most important one is to be organized and to fight for their, for their work and the recognition of their work. We thank you very much for your time. My apologies for letting this run a little bit later. If you want to know more, please visit our website. We have a position on dump site closures, and in the chat, you will find some of the resources that were also shared by some of our presenters. We thank you very much to our speakers, to the participants, and also for the interpreters that helped us communicate. Thank you very much, and hope you have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.